My, have we got a lot of stuff to talk about. Yes, welcome along to this week's Women's Football Chat. And if the news over the past 14 days or so has shown me anything, it's that you really shouldn't go on holiday. A big thank you to Ricky from Bournemouth Sports for chatting to me ahead of last week's show. Gave you something for last week. Fascinating 25 minutes there to just explain a bit about how teams are having to change going into the new season, as I'm aware that the ground grading criteria has just become that bit more difficult to achieve, but we haven't had any full reports on that. This is the Women's Football Chat, the show dedicated to the third and fourth tiers of women's football here in England. That's the FA Women's National League. My name is Chris Gadsby. I'm here every Thursday at 6 p.m, bringing you the very latest from the 6 divisions within the FAWNL and the 72 clubs that are in those 6 divisions. We do have a lot to get through and not all of it is good, but we will start with just a few little bits and pieces of news. We have 2 bits of news coming from Worcester City. Firstly, it's the news that they have a new manager. I have to find that again because their website's decided it doesn't want to work anymore. Matt Jones is the new first team head coach of Worcester City Women. Obviously, they got promoted into the FAWNL last season. They will be competing in Division 1 Midlands in a few weeks' time. And that is their first piece of news. Their second piece of news is that they have a new badge. And unlike most of these kind of modern badges, which seem to be very minimalist and don't really mean a whole lot, the video that they put out explaining where the bits of the badge have come from, so Worcester Cathedral is a big part of obviously the Worcester landmark. The rays within the badge are representing the RISE core values that the club abide by, and then they've got the dates the club established, so 2021 when Worcester were founded as an independent club, and actually they've all come together to make what I think is a really nice badge. Not some of this, modern stuff, which I'm really not a fan of, but it's actually a really nice new badge for Worcester City ahead of next season. So that's 2 bits of news from them. Other bits of news, you'll remember a few weeks ago we spoke about the trouble that Bridgwater United were having getting their season finished because the clubs were being taken in different directions from where they wanted, and it meant that they couldn't play at Fairfax Park, and it got really messy over in Bridgwater. Well, they have announced now that they will be playing at Fairfax Park for the 24-25 season. They say that following positive discussions between the men's club and the separately owned women's club, an agreement has been made on the use of the Fairfax Park Stadium. The agreement sees free access granted and no charge applicable, which is vastly important for the women's side. They've seen huge growth in recent years with some exciting future plans in place. The women's club are pleased to have the security of using Fairfax Park, which meets FA ground grading for Tier 4 women's football. The season is due to commence on the 18th of August. That's another point I'm going to come on to in a moment. And the women's side will be releasing more details as to what the local community can expect at a women's game, with more details on the match day experience and what have you. So good news coming out of Bridgwater there. That then brings us on to then the confirmed start date, although it's not actually been confirmed from the FAWNL because media, FAWNL, yeah, we all know what that's like. But the big kickoff has been confirmed. It will start on Sunday the 18th of August, which was the date that we all expected, third Sunday in August. So we are now just 6 weeks away, coming up to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, yeah, 6.5 weeks away from the start of the new season. I know a lot of teams, they start their first pre-season fixtures coming up this weekend, but we are getting ever closer to the start of the new campaign. The fixtures are due to be released in mid-July, which for me kind of ranges from anywhere to the 10th to the 22nd, somewhere in that week. I'd expect if the fixtures aren't released next week, they'll be released the week after. But we'll just have to wait and see on that one. Let's then stay in the south, and we're going to stay in the southwest after the move across from southeast to southwest. That Worthing are delighted to confirm the appointment of Jesus Corden as women's manager. Now he joins from Sussex rivals Haywards Heath, and see, they got themselves relegated last year. But the appointment follows a thorough and extensive recruitment process in finding the club's next permanent manager following John Donohue's departure at the end of 23-24. And they want to focus on a candidate who can seamlessly adopt the club's established footballing philosophy. It says after an extensive recruitment process, it became clear that he really aligned with the club's philosophy of developing young players, playing attractive football and building a long-term project for the future. As a club, we are really proud of how brilliantly our women's team have developed over the last few years, and it was important we took our time through this process to make sure we found the right person to continue this journey with. Now, Corden has previously worked with Lewis Women as assistant manager during their time in the Championship. And after he left there, became assistant manager at Crawley Wasps, and they moved to Chatham Town. So he's got plenty of experience in and around that area. And we'll see how he gets on with Worthing as they start life in a new league, having moved from southeast to southwest because of the geography of teams coming down. Final then piece of big news really in terms of managerial appointments comes from Norwich City, who are now going to win Division 1 South East. That's my prediction, because they have appointed Andy Cook as their head coach. Of course, Andy Cook last year as part of the management staff of Newcastle won the Northern Premier Division. The year before that as head coach of Nottingham Forest won the Northern Premier Division. And Norwich City have snapped themselves up an absolutely brilliant manager in Andy Cook. So he has now taken up that position. They announced it, but then he was going to take up the position from July the 1st. So he joins from Newcastle, as I've said, where his first team coach helped them achieve promotion to the Championship and reach the final of the Cup, which of course he won the year before with Forest as well. And he also has experience in the second team. He was first team manager for Oxford United when they were in Super League 2. He's been with Arsenal as a development coach, Durham Women as a head coach as well. He says he's delighted to be here, looking around the facilities, meeting some of the players, and the staff has been brilliant. Everyone at the club has welcomed me. He wanted to work in a place, an environment where he could shape and help model something that's going to progress long term and that's going to challenge him. And he's going to a city like Norwich and a club like Norwich that will do that. Now, General Manager Flo Allen has said, "We are delighted to be welcoming Andy to Norwich City. He joins us with a proven track record within the FAWNL, and throughout the extensive recruitment process, his knowledge, experience and approach to player development stood out. His coaching philosophy aligns perfectly to our club vision and values, and his appointment comes at an exciting stage of our journey as we continue to evolve and develop." So, yeah, if you're Norwich City, you must be rubbing your hands together with glee right now to have the likes of Andy Cook as manager of Norwich, because that is an appointment definitely didn't see coming. But wow, that's a big appointment for Norwich City. So those are, from the last couple of weeks, the two so more than that, wasn't it? 4 or 5 little bits of news coming out over the last 2 weeks or so. So let's move through now. Before we get to the quarter-final draw of the summer knockout tournament, don't worry, that is coming later on in the show. Have not forgotten about that. With just eight teams remaining now, some cracking ties are sure to be drawn out in that competition. There are two big pieces of news we need to talk about. One came out of the AGM and one is causing no end of mess. So coming out of the AGM, professional game academy teams will be eligible to enter the FAWNL Plate competition next season after plans put forward by the board were given the green light. Now, PGA teams are kind of your academy teams, so under 15s to like under 21s. This is going to be the under 21s, you would imagine. Run by the clubs in the top two tiers, the Super League and the Championship, and they are set to enter the Plate competition. Now, I hate this. That's the simple way of doing it. Okay, let's just go through a few things. So this is going to be essentially very similar to how the EFL Trophy runs in the men's game, where you've got your under 21 side in the sides from the Premier League teams going into that competition with the League One and League Two sides in their competition. Now, nowhere, I think the quarterfinals is the furthest an under 21 side has got in that competition. They've certainly not won it. The women's game is very, very different. And nothing against these sides in the Plate competition, but in the men's game, you've got an under 21s team from a proper functioning academy going up against full-time professional football clubs who, yes, are a couple of divisions, 3 divisions below the Premier League, but then again, these under 21 players aren't obviously in the Premier League, but they are professional full-time football teams, and you get relatively close games. That's not like that in the FAWNL. What you get in the FAWNL is an under 21 side from a proper functioning academy coming up against sides who train once, maybe twice a week, and are nurses and teachers and shop assistants and business owners and, you know, public servants, etc., who have other full-time jobs. If you're going to make an equivalent, it would be like the under 21s in the men's game playing in the semi-pro, like the FA Vars, at like National League North, tier 6 of the football pyramid, tier 6, tier 7, the non-league teams competition. And if you put them in that competition, I would argue they would probably win that competition. You know, they have very close games against teams in tier 3 and 4. If you put them against teams in tier 6 and 7, they'd probably win it. And I am very concerned that professional game academy teams, and I will pluck a random team out of the air here, and again, no reason, but I think a Chelsea under 21 side would probably beat an Ashford Town. Or a Manchester City under 21 side would probably beat a Cheadle Town. Or a York City Ladies. Bristol City women's under 21 side probably beat a Keynsham Town. And I am very concerned that what's going to happen in the FAWNL Plate is that the FAWNL teams aren't going to be in their own competition. That's my big concern with it. Now, the other point, it's not like this is going to remove any rounds either, because there aren't enough. There's 23 teams because of the Reading situation, which we'll get onto because that affects everything on the board behind me. 23 teams. If every single one of those teams put aside in the FAWNL Plate, once you've done the determining round, you've got 36 FAWNL teams and 23 PGA teams. That makes 59. Which means you've still got to have a preliminary round with a few teams getting a bye to get down to 32. So you're not removing any rounds. You've still got to have that preliminary round. The only way of doing it and getting more teams with weekends freed up is to have round one with all 36 FAWNL teams going up against each other to take them down to 18, and then adding in 14 PGA teams to get you back to 32, and then you can streamline to 16,842. That would mean a lot of FAWNL sides would be freed up early on to use those weekends to play other league games, which is the only upside, and I use upside in inverted commas because it's not a bloody upside, because it means you can get the league fixtures played more easily. But we still, yes, it was a bit of a squeeze at the end, but we still pretty much almost got them in. And that's another thing, because they're shortening the league season by a week next year because they reckon they can get it in by the end of April. That makes sense. And I just can't see a positive in this, because it's not like the men's game. The women's football pyramid is very different to the men's football pyramid. I just cannot see how this is going to work. So however many PGA teams enter into the competition, there is going to be a preliminary round. Cup and Plate preliminary rounds are also going to be midweek this year, which is why they think they can shorten the league season by putting an extra midweek game in there. That means that you're just going to get drawn against the teams that are really close by to you, so there's almost no point having a draw, because you're just going to get paired up with teams that are close to you. It's almost going to be seeded, which again takes away from the competition. It's ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous. So we'll wait to see what happens with that. But I get the impression that it's just not going to go down very well. In terms of the comments on it, I mean, the comments have only come from the previous FAWNL board, i.e. Carol West and Jane Roberts and the like. And, you know, over the past few years, there have been times I've very much disagreed with Carol, and there have been times where our thoughts align. And this is one of those times where our thoughts align. Disgusting from the FAWNL board is willing to potentially deny WNL clubs and players the opportunity to reach a national final in their own competition, to give minutes for players on the basis that the PGA system is ineffective. Other people chiming in, sounds like they want to encroach on the success of last year's national cups for exposure. It just doesn't work. And yeah, other people have been talking about, you know, how's that sort of thing working in the men's EFL trophy? Extremely low attendances as fans see the cup being demeaned by the Prem under 23 teams. It's going to be exactly the same thing in this. Exactly the same thing in this. And if you're going to have some of the top teams, because don't get me wrong, the top teams, your Man Cities, your Man U's, your Chelsea's, your what have you, they will put an under 21s team in this competition. They will absolutely do it. Do not be surprised if you end up with a Man City versus Chelsea under 21s final in the FAWNL Plate. It's awful. Simple as that. Right, let's then move on to the other big piece of news, because that affects everything to do with next season in the FAWNL. And it's to do with Reading, who have decided that, well, I say decided is the wrong word, because they are having to drop down from tier 2 into tier 5. The club statement says, and I know this isn't FAWNL, but it affects the FAWNL for reasons I'll come on to. Reading Football Club can today confirm it has reluctantly withdrawn from the Barclays Women's Championship for the 24-25 season, the women's first team now moving into tier 5 of the women's football pyramid. That will be the Southern Region Women's Premier League. To continue to operate at Barclays Women's Championship level, the club requires further ownership, cash injection to build a squad capable of competing and to meet the revised mandatory criteria. Not sure exactly what that is, it's not been published, but ahead of the 24-25 season. This would have included returning to a full-time training model as well as further investments in facilities and personnel. That makes it sound like Championship has to be full-time. May just be the wording slightly off, but that makes it sound like the Championship has to be full-time as well. Whilst these requirements are in line with the exponential growth of the women's game, it's widely accepted that a direct financial return on annual investment is not expected for at least 5 years, and given the current economic realities of the club, it's just not possible to do that. Club personnel with support from the FA have exhaustively explored every option, including external funding, new investment, but it just hasn't come off for them. They say how while the club recognises and encourages the huge rise in popularity and commercialisation of the women's game, it unfortunately does not have guarantees of the required finances to increase investment into Reading FC women. They've competed among the elites of the women's game for many years, alongside Chelsea, Arsenal, Man City, Man U in previous seasons, despite being one of the only clubs outside of the Premier League, i.e. what they're referring to there is the men's team not being in the Premier League. And they're proud of the role that Reading has played in nurturing young players with football, and they are hoping that proceeding into a lower division will allow them to gain promotions back to the top divisions in the future. So, as I said, it sounds as though players are having to return to a full-time training model. That's what Reading say. We've had all that stuff coming out in the past few days about Blackburn and paying players £9,000 a year, 16 hours a week, which of course isn't full-time. Sheffield United are supposedly struggling as well. It shows how delicate everything is, and I've been doing a little bit of thinking here about, because no one really says all of what the finances are, but I've been doing some thinking, and it's rough and it's an estimate, but I've used figures that make doing the maths easy, so you'll kind of get where I'm going with it. In order to pay a player full-time, you're wanting to be paying them 25,000. That's probably about where you are to be able to do that as your one and only job. Again, might be slightly higher, might be slightly lower, but 25 is an easy number to multiply with. If you're doing that across your squad of 22, 23 players, plus 6 or 7 coaching staff, 30 people, roughly, I know again could be more, could be less, you're looking at £750,000 just in wages. So £750,000 just in wages every year to pay players and staff at £25,000 each, roughly. And obviously your top players, when I'm saying top players, I mean like Super League here, obviously be earning more than that. But again, maths, rough. So you're looking at £750,000 just in wages, which kind of aligns with reports we've heard that like Newcastle put 2 million in last year, Forest put 1 million in last year. That would kind of work. So you've got to find £750,000 just to cover wages. Let's look at gate receipts. Teams in the FAWNL particularly, again, because that's what I'm using for where we've got here, but we can go roughly, you're charging £5 a game for an adult to get in, maybe on average. If adults are a bit more, but they're taking the kids, which are a bit less, maybe a £5, getting 300-400 people in, £2,000 times 11 home games plus 3 or 4 cup games, let's call it 15 because why not, £30,000. Put that straight into the wages, you're still needing to find £720,000 to cover it. Okay, let's look at sponsorship. You can get player sponsorship in, that's fine. I know Forest's was £500 a year. That could be another 10,000. Okay, now you need £710,000 to find. Okay, let's look at shirt sponsorship. Again, it varies from club to club. Let's use the information we've got, which is from Halifax this year. They are raffling off their front of shirt sponsor for £50. They say it's a package worth £5,000. Okay, well now we need to find another £705,000, and that's just for wages. And you can see where we're having to get this external investment, and you're at the minute you're having to find, and I know there's other money, you know, there's FA Cup money coming into that. Well, I think Forest and Wolves got to round 5 each and they picked up 100,000. Okay, you still need another 600,000, and you're needing that pumped in every time, and you can see there how it's so fragile. Everything is so fragile in this pyramid because you're just having to, you're relying so much on external factors to pour money in. The clubs aren't able to generate anything themselves. Now, they're not getting 30,000 people filling out a stadium, paying 30 quid a ticket each, like the men's games are, and you're picking up £1 million a game every home game. We're not doing that. It's so fragile and so difficult, and almost, don't want to say that the growth is happening too quickly and some clubs can't keep up, but almost clubs just can't keep up with the demands being put on them. And that is a dangerous situation because it almost seems to be snowballing at the minute. You'd have maybe 1 a year, maybe 2 a year. We had the Wyndham Town and Hounslow problem in the FAWNL, and now it's like, well, Reading have struggled, they've gone down into tier 5. Apparently Sheffield United are struggling, apparently Blackburn are struggling. I've heard reports that London City are you know, in a similar boat in places, and it's like, we could end up in this really awkward situation. We really could. But let's get back on track to Reading. It affects the entire pyramid. Well, it affects from tier 2 down to tier 4. But it's very awkward because we're not going to know how until the end of next season. And to explain this, it's probably worth going to the board. Okay, so here we are at the board. I appreciate that the actual teams are slightly blurry on there, but what's actually on the board doesn't matter. So, situation is Championship, 1 tier above. We've got tier 3 here and tier 4 below. So the Championship is going to run with just 11 teams for this year, which means that only 1 team will come down from the Championship and filter into the FAWNL system. The problem with that is we are still going to have the 2 league winners going up, which means that with only 1 down and 2 going up, tier 3 will only have 23 teams in it next season. Now, how do we solve that? Well, we make only 3 teams go down from tier 3 into tier 4, with 4 teams coming up, and then in tier 4 we'll only have 47 teams rather than 48, so we'll only make 7 teams go down rather with 8 coming up, and then that will balance out the FAWNL again and the Championship. But tier 5 will have an extra space in it, which isn't a problem because they have spaces in it anyway. That's what's going to happen. However, geography plays a big part in this, and the problem we've got is that the Championship finishes after the FAWNL. So let's say, and I will pluck a team out of thin air, Durham. First team that came to mind in the Championship. Let's say they're the ones that get relegated. They will, of course, go into the Northern Premier Division, which means the Northern Premier Division will be fine. They'll have the 12 teams, but the Southern Premier Division, which doesn't have a team slotting into it, will be a team short, which means only the 12th place side in the Southern Premier Division goes down. For argument's sake, we'll say Watford because they're last alphabetically and this is all alphabetical. That means the 11th place side will stay in Tier 3. That will then filter down into the 2 Tier 4 leagues. So let's, for argument's sake, say it's Watford. They, of course, will go into Division 1 South East. No problem for Division 1 South East, then they will stay at 12 teams. Problem for Division 1 South West, because Division 1 South West will end up with only 11. So in Division 1 South West, the 11th place side will stay, and they'll then get their 2 teams from Tier 5. It's fine, and it will work out. Problem is, FAWNL finishes, in theory, last weekend in April. Championship finishes the week after, or maybe 2 weeks after, can't remember, but I know it's after. Particularly if it might be tight, and the worst case scenario is tight between a northern and a southern side, we could be in a situation where the FAWNL finishes and nobody knows what's happening. We could be in a situation, particularly like if the championship comes down to the final day, we've got teams in 11th spot in the Northern and Southern Premier Division who have finished their seasons going, have we survived? Have we not? It depends what happens here. And then likewise, every team in Tier 4 that finished in 11th, have we survived? Have we not? It depends. Because whatever the geography of this tier is, the team that comes down from this tier depends on which would affect which 11th spot side from Tier 3 remains, and whichever 11th spot side from Tier 3 remains and where they would be geographically affects which Tier 4 league the 11th space team survives. So if we just use, well, as a just pure example because it's alphabetical, we're waiting for the championship to finish. Plymouth have finished 11th in the south, West Brom have finished 11th in the north. They don't know if they're going to be playing Tier 3 or Tier 4 until the championship finishes. Likewise, Sutton Coldfield, Queen's Park Rangers, Swindon Town, Stockport County all finish 11th in Tier 4. 3 of them will be playing in Tier 5, 1 of them will survive, and they might not know who it's going to be until the championship finishes, which affects the south or the north, which affects the Tier 4. That it's very awkward. It's really awkward. And then of course it gets even more complicated to an extent because of teams. I mean, it's going to be a next season problem, but teams come up if they're all angled towards one area and you've got, okay, now you're going to have some lateral movement. It's like, well, because we were based in the southwest, we've been relegated, but now all teams from southeast have come up, so we're going to shunt across, and actually you could have done with losing another southeast side. Very difficult, very awkward, complete mess. The aim for everybody, you've got to treat it like the bottom 2 go down, aim to finish 10th, and if you finish 11th, hope. But we are in a situation where we could get to the end of the season and teams don't know if they're down or not. Could be very, very messy. Now, of course, all of that is a theory, and it could end up going completely out of the water if this sort of bubbling away discussion, rumour, call it what you will, about an expansion of the Super League and the Championship happens. It kind of talks about maybe a 25-26 season expansion, because that would throw everything out of the water, because then we'd have to find a load more teams from Tier 3 to push up and everything would change. So I just And you'd feel like that would have to happen, an announcement of that would have to happen this summer. It just feels messy and awkward, and nobody really knows what's going on. And a situation where it's like, can we just get back on the pitch playing football and just have some sort of normality is kind of the cry, really. So yeah, very messy, very awkward. We'll see what happens. That's all we can do. But let's move back then into more positive things. It is the quarter-final draw for the 2024 Women's Football Chat Summer Knockout Competition. 8 teams remain, including previous finalists, previous winners as well. So some great ties. We've got to the point now where the teams that are remaining either have great supporter bases or get involved with the tournament themselves. So not a very long draw, as you can imagine. There are only 8 teams to go, but let's find out who is going to take on who in the quarterfinal of the Women's Football Chat Summer Knockout 2024. Yes, welcome back to the draw room for the penultimate time this summer. We are down to the final 8 sides in this year's Summer Knockout Tournament, and we are down now to teams who have a very good supporter following that have been pushing them through or have been getting involved with the tournament themselves. Just 8 remains. Going to be some cracking ties that are drawn out in just a few moments' time. Let's remind ourselves then, after we have had the week break for me going away on holiday, of the remaining teams in this summer knockout competition. Ball number 1 is the inaugural champions Chesham United. 2, Dulwich Hamlet, newly promoted side who knocked out reigning champions Wolverhampton Wanderers. 3, Halifax. 4, Loughborough Lightning. 5, last year's finalists Norton Stockton Ancients. 6, Nottingham Forest. 7, Plymouth Argyle, and 8, Stourbridge. So we've got a previous winner, a previous finalist, side new to the FAWNL who's knocked out a previous winner. So many great teams left in this quarter-final draw. Let's just quickly remind ourselves of the rules. So these ties will be drawn and then go up on www.womensfootballchat.wordpress.com, and they will be open from the conclusion of this draw until midnight on Sunday, when we will have our semi-finalists. They will then be drawn out against each other for the semi-final, and then we'll have our final 2. It's 1 vote per person. In the event of a tie, we will have a special, almost a bit like a penalty shootout, 1 day shootout between those 2 teams to see who comes out on top. So those are the rules of the competition. As I said, this won't take very long, just 8 teams left to draw into this quarter final. Let's get straight down to it. First team out of the quarter-final, number 2, Dulwich Hamlet. Dulwich Hamlet, the first side out in these quarter-finals. And Dulwich Hamlet go up against last year's finalists Norton and Stockton Ancients. Dulwich Hamlet against Norton and Stockton Ancients. Number 8, Stourbridge. Stourbridge drawn out next. Always do well thanks to their supporters, Stourbridge, and the club get involved as well. And Stourbridge take on Loughborough Lightning. Stourbridge against Loughborough Lightning in the quarter-finals. Next out is Halifax. Halifax, the next side. Just 3 teams remaining. And they are the inaugural champions Cheshire United, Nottingham Forest and Plymouth Argyle. And Halifax will come up against Plymouth Argyle. Halifax against Plymouth Argyle, an all Tier 3 tie. And that means, of course, it doesn't matter which order that these two come out in. But it will be number 6, Nottingham Forest. And Nottingham Forest will take on number 1, Cheshire United. So those quarter-final ties for you then. Dulwich Hamlet against Norton and Stockton Ancients, Stourbridge against Loughborough Lightning, Halifax versus Plymouth Argyle and Nottingham Forest against Cheshire United. Voting for those ties is open now and will run through until midnight on Sunday, at which point we will know our 4 semi-finalists for the 2024 Women's Football Chat Summer Knockout. Well, there we are then, some absolutely cracking ties for the quarter-final. Voting open now and will be open until midnight on Sunday, when we will have our 4 semi-finalists and who will be taking the crown of the FAWNL favourite club for 2024. That will just about do it for this week's Women's Football Chat. It's a shame it's not been full of happy news. That is the way of women's football at the moment, it seems. I'll be back next Thursday at 6 p.m. bringing you that semi-final draw and the very latest from the FAWNL. So do join me then, and to make sure you don't miss any show, please feel free to like and subscribe, and then you can even turn on notifications and get the show straight into your inbox every single week. I've been Chris Gadsby. Thank you very much for watching and or listening to this week's episode of the Women's Football Chat, and goodbye.